Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kesha Rogers, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's Schiller Institute Symposium. The theme of our symposium today is a new paradigm, international cooperation in space and along the New Silk Road. And I definitely want to thank those of you who waded through this crazy weather and made it here very safely, and safe travels to you when you leave here. Just to start with, I want to give you an introduction of our panelists, and I will go through further introduction in a little bit here when I introduce them one at a time. But we will be joined today, first of all, by the Deputy Consul General, Russian Deputy Consul General, Mr. Dmitry Prosvirkin. Prosvirkin, thank you very much. And followed by Consul Xiao Wang for Science and Technology, Consul General of the People's Republic of China. And I think we have in the audience with us, sorry, I just lost my card here. We have also joined in the audience representing the Republic, Consul General of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Alfani, Vice Consul of Information and Cultural Affairs. I want to thank you very much for being here with us today. So I want to start by, and finally, pardon me, I'm sorry, and I'd like to also, our final speaker is going to be Mr. Brian Lantz. I know Brian so well here. Sorry. Mr. Lantz is going to be representing the Schiller Institute, and he will be one of our panelists on the panel as well. So thank you very much. Thank you all for being here with us today. Now, I just want to give some brief remarks on why we're here, and also to give you a sense of who the Schiller Institute is. To let you know that the Schiller Institute was founded in November 24th of 1984. So this makes this year the 35th anniversary of the founding of the Schiller Institute. The principles of the Schiller Institute were founded around the conception of the Declaration of Independence of the United States, and that idea of the Declaration of the Inalienable Rights of Man, based on the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. The Schiller Institute was founded by Helga Zepp LaRouche and her husband Lyndon LaRouche in 1984. The principles of the Schiller Institute are really embedded in this very idea of cooperation among nations around the aesthetical education of man. For those who don't know, Friedrich Schiller is known as the German poet of freedom, and the emphasis of the Schiller Institute for many decades now has been through peace through development, international cooperation. You will find on the back table there, we have material representing the decades of history of great projects that the Schiller Institute has been instrumental in promoting, going back to the first founding and first program that was introduced by the Schiller Institute. And Mr. Lantz is going to go through this a little bit more extensively. Just want to show you that you can find this material on the back there. This is the first report we put out called the Eurasian Land Bridge, a New Silk Road Locomotive for Worldwide Economic Development. In 1997, yes. Now, that has also been continued, that program, through the writing of The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, a Shared Future for Humanity. Now, just so you know, the New Silk Road report has now been put out in at least 3 different languages. It's now in Mandarin, in Chinese, Chinese Mandarin, in Arabic, I believe it might be in Spanish as well, in German. So it's in a number of different languages that you will be able to find this, and we have some of those different languages on the back table there represented. So again, the idea of the Schiller Institute is embedded in the following statement: that all human beings on this planet have inalienable rights which guarantee them life, freedom, and material conditions worthy of man, and the right to develop fully all potentialities of their intellect and their souls. That therefore change in the present monetary and economic order is necessary and urgent to establish justice among the peoples of the world. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. International cooperation based on a new system of principles of relationship among nations. This is going to focus heavily on economic development, cooperation in space, and what you're going to hear from our speakers on what is actually taking place in terms of cooperation amongst the United States, as well as China, Russia, other countries right now. And particularly, we're going to focus heavily on the Belt and Road, the New Silk Road initiative. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I do want to let people know, our panelists here, that the Schiller Institute promotes dialogue of cultures, which is based on the idea, as I said before, of the aesthetical education of man, of organizing the principles of a harmonious world based on exchange of dialogue amongst cultures. And I do want to let all of you know that this event is the first event this week of 2 events that we're going to be hosting. And I would like to invite each and every one of you to come out. The Schiller Institute is celebrating its 35th anniversary. It's also the anniversary of the birthday of the German poet of freedom, Friedrich Schiller. So you will find in the back an invitation to celebrate Schiller's birthday with the Schiller Institute on November 9th, this coming Saturday, of poetry, drama, music, classical music. And as I said, we're doing this truly to inspire the population around this beautiful conception and beautiful ideal of mankind. So again, because we got started a little bit late here, I do want to let you know that at the end, we're going to sort of change our program around a little bit. I encourage each of you to stay. We have some remarks that have been made by the founder, Ms. Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Unfortunately, those remarks are videotaped, and she sent them over to us. So we want to have our speakers here to be able to go first, and then we're going to play the remarks by Mrs. LaRouche at the end, which will really put the historic context of the founding of the Schiller Institute into perspective there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists so that we can have plenty of room for dialogue and discussion at the end. So first of all, we're going to actually start with Mr. Lantz here, who's going to open up the discussion for us. And as I said before, Brian Lantz has been a longtime collaborator and representative of the Schiller Institute, and we welcome your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. We kind of quickly huddled and agreed on the order here of presentation. Again, I thank you all for coming out today on this rainy day here in Houston. And we'll be sharing this. We're, of course, recording this, and we'll be sharing this. It'll be streamed later, available later, and we'll reach a larger audience. And I think it's really, for those who are here, and for those that will have a chance to watch this in the coming days and weeks, This is really an extraordinary opportunity, given that we have representatives of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, here in Houston, engaged in this discussion with us on these important issues of cooperation, international cooperation, and the important issues of space and economic development, the Belt and Road included in that, the Belt and Road Initiative. So let me just start. The first slide I have, I'm going to be using a few slides here to order my remarks. I have up here, we'll see how we work on the lights.
It's right there.
Oh, switch right there. Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, all right. I'm Kraft Erika, the German-American scientist. I think the quote at the top, is just, it's kind of jarring and provocative in the right kind of way. If God wanted man to become a spacefaring species, he would have given man a moon, which of course is exactly what he did. His three fundamental laws of astronautics there at the bottom. First law, and I'll just leave it at that and you can read the other two. Nobody and nothing under the natural laws of the universes imposes any limitations on man except for man himself. So I hope that you'll carry that forward in terms of of my remarks, kind of the theme of my remarks as we go forward. Kraft Erika was responsible for the Centaur rocket, still being used today, to boost satellites and the rest into space. He was also one of the individuals that developed the concept of gravity assist. Many areas that he worked on here in the United States as part of the space program. He was a board member of the Schiller Institute up until his passing some years ago. So move on to the next slide, if you will. This is the international cooperation that we're saying is so critical. This is how mankind is going to move out into space. It's a big place out there, as we all know. Cooperation is already occurring. The IISS, the International Space Station, would not be in space without the Mir and the Russian efforts that preceded it, and the Russian-U.S. cooperation that brought the IISS into being. And you could bring up many more examples along these same lines. And this is also the opportunity in terms of economic cooperation of the Belt and Road Initiative, which we'll talk about in a second. To the next slide. Now, it's not just Kraft Erika, someone you may not have known about until now. I hope you'll explore him, find out more about him and his extraterrestrial imperative. But President John F. Kennedy was very clear on this perspective of collaboration in science and space exploration as being fundamental to mankind's advance. This was from a speech to the United Nations in 1963, shortly before his death. But keep in mind, this is also only less than a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is shortly after he had announced the U.S. project to go to the moon within the decade. And here he was, within a year, proposing at the United Nations that the United States and what was then the Soviet Union had both a special capacity and that there was room in 1963, room for new cooperation for further joint efforts, and I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. And that was the perspective of the President of the United States as he addressed the United Nations, with broad support among the American people at that time. Now, this is also the spirit, I would say, to broaden it. This is the spirit of Bandung. This is the spirit of the non-aligned nations movement, which was founded, the non-aligned nations movement founded in 1961. Bandung, I believe, was 1955, the Bandung Summit of Asian and African countries for cooperation. In other words, this was the spirit of the time. It wasn't just the moonshot against the backdrop of the Cold War. This is a much more dynamic process. And I would suggest that we really should refresh ourselves, kind of mentally, refresh ourselves today, because after really decades of what has in the intervening period has been endless wars, we now have the potential, the possibility of picking up those pieces and carrying, really we already are, carrying forward that spirit of, I'll say Bandung, the spirit of Kennedy's speech to the United Nations. So if we move on to the next slide. Now today we'll be hearing more, I think, a bit here and there. This is not an event for technical presentations per se. I don't think any of us are intended that. But we'll be hearing more a little bit on China's program, very successful. As you know, the Chang'e 4 is on the far side of the moon now. And there was cooperation from the U.S. side with China, despite the Wolf Amendment. In that landing and data retrieval and targeting for that landing between the U.S. and China, limited but important. And Jim Bridenstine, the head of NASA, has stressed his personal desire for a space cooperation and would like to see the Wolf Amendment overturned. We can come back to that. Russia, as I mentioned, is absolutely instrumental. We couldn't get to the space station today without Russia, as I think you all know. But that's putting it in a negative. The positive is that there's been tremendous cooperation, including in science and scientific research. Science does not know boundaries. No one owns the principle of gravity. Discoveries of a fundamental nature contribute to all of mankind. That's not just well, I'll come back to this in a second. Here we have the Artemis program outlined. This is the program. You may not even be aware of it, since there's been so little press coverage in the United States because of Russiagate, impeachment, all of this. But it's been announced. The U.S. is now committed, NASA is now committed to putting the first woman on the moon by 2024 with an additional man. This will be the first step towards a sustained presence on the moon over the intervening years, a few following years. The next slide. This is the Belt and Road Initiative, a schematic of it in terms of a global picture. I would just say on the Artemis mission, this mission involves over something on the order of 34 launches between now and 2024. 34 launches. This is going to stretch the capacity beyond the United States. Jim Bridenstine was just recently in Japan. Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, recently announced that Russia was preparing 2 additional Soyuz capsules because of the requirements, clearly, that the United States was going to have for launches. We're not going to stop everything else just for those 37 launches for Artemis. There's a lot else that still has to go on with the ISS and so forth. So again, cooperation, international cooperation is going to be required. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative. This was announced, if I recall correctly, in 2014. Is that correct? Or 2013? 2013. In 2013, in Kazakhstan, by President Xi Jinping of China. The Belt and Road Initiative is an initiative. It's open-ended. It's a self-expanding, developing process of cooperation among nations based on win-win, consultation, mutual advantage. This is not the domination of one or the other. There's now, just as a measure of that, there's now 137 nations that have come into agreements, memorandums of understanding and other formal agreements with China and with the other nations of the Belt and Road Initiative. And so now 137 nations, this is a cooperative, collaborative effort. And what you have just sketched out here, the Eurasian land bridge across Eurasia through Russia and on into Western Europe and vice versa. High-speed rail unit trains are running through a multitude of cities in Europe and China right now, at this time. This is an explosion that's occurred since the announcement of the Belt and Road. Africa, major projects in Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Angola, Nigeria, dams, rail projects, and the rest. Over $1.2 trillion equivalent have been committed to this date. And that's just an approximation. The projects go far beyond this. And this is bringing prosperity, economic development, most fundamentally hope to the entire to continents. And this is also now encompassing South America and the Caribbean as well. On to the next slide, if you will. This is just tracing out the key corridors of the land bridge. I believe 7 listed there, including the maritime Silk Road, which reaches further south through Indonesia and on across the Pacific into the Americas. You see the China, Mongolia, Russia economic corridor, the new Eurasian land bridge economic corridor, the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar project, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is the most advanced, I believe, along with the Eurasian land bridge. These are projects that are ongoing now. And this is what the United States can and must join and collaborate with. To the next slide. And Africa, just a moment on Africa. Africa will have a 1 billion man and woman workforce within 15 years. 1 billion workers. Those workers provided with education, health care, and infrastructure is going to be the economic driver for the coming decades, beyond what we have already. This is going to be another dimension, and the projects now being put in place are extremely important in that regard. We've published a report extending the new Silk Road to West Asia and Africa that was published 2 years ago and is available. On to the next. Now, this part of this optimism that's afoot in the world. This is the recent ASEAN-India Summit, November 3rd, just held. And you had the completion in the context of the ASEAN summits. There's several coupled together in the same time frame. But you had the completion of the RCEP trade agreements among the Asian nations with China inclusive. And India is playing its own role, major role in this process, making its own decisions. It's not part of RCEP yet, but those negotiations continue as Prime Minister Modi has emphasized. Next slide. And then we had the Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi just a few weeks ago. Leaders of almost all the African nations were there. An entire day, as I understand, was devoted to nuclear power and the potential of nuclear power, which is not merely a potential. South Africa has nuclear power. There's nuclear research programs in Africa and so forth. But here we have al-Sisi, President al-Sisi of Egypt, President also of the African Union, together with President Vladimir Putin. They led the conference and this summit. Russia is going to be playing an expanding role. beyond what it's already doing throughout Africa. And Egypt is really the gateway to Africa. El-Sisi has pursued a very aggressive development program, highways, rail, and other transport connectivity for Africa as part of his presidency of the African Union. To the next, and that's just a shot of the gathering there at Sochi, as I said, just at the end of October. On to the next. Now, this is not coming a moment too soon. Kesha alluded to this in her opening remarks. We are facing a new onrushing financial crisis, not something caused by, a bubble in the Chinese economy, or something you might read in Bloomberg, or climate change, but fundamentals. This is LaRouche, is a physical economist, developed this triple curve as a pedagogical, looking at it from the standpoint of monetary aggregates and financial aggregates, monetary being the actual printing press, financial aggregates being the value of financial instruments, stocks, bonds, financial derivatives, and so forth. And the correlative condition of the real physical output per capita, and we're looking here again, this is a pedagogical, but this is the overall trend lines of the Western economies, Europe as well as the United States, over the last 40 to 50 years. Since you could say the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and certainly the end of the NASA moonshot, the Apollo program. The downgrading of physical economic production, the shrinking of manufacturing, machine tool design, more fundamentally scientific research, more and more boxed into very limited areas, military spending in particular. But overall, the declining physical output per capita in the West, which has been drained, like a parasite draining blood out of a victim, has been preyed upon by a predatory financial system, which has grown and ballooned enormously. The global derivatives market is now about $1.4 quadrillion, and that's just a rough estimate. It's a self-serving bubble, and now interest rates have gone to zero. The central banks in the West have gone to virtual zero or negative in Europe, and they're trending in that direction here as well, to support this continued bubble, a bubble that's on the verge of blowing out. Corporate debt in the United States, for example, has more than doubled since before the 2007-2008 so-called Great Recession. That corporate debt bubble, including oil and gas, for example, it's stretched at the limit. Consumer debt in terms of student loans, car loans, so on and so forth, you could go on. The farm situation, the condition of American farmers, is another feature of this, a critical feature. Now, what's going to be required to address this? Next slide, please. Again, a collaborative approach, because we have to take this from the top down. We've posed it, Mr. LaRouche posed it, we pose it as a new Bretton Woods, in which the four powers of the United States, Russia, China, and India, as the four leading powers, the United States representing European civilization, really, as a continuation, but with these major civilizations of China, of Russia, of India, around them, then other nations being brought in, is the basis for a new Bretton Woods. Next slide. A new Bretton Woods, as was organized at the end of World War II, to create a new financial structure. That's what we did then. Out of World War II, we created a new financial architecture. It was hijacked, but nonetheless, the intention of Roosevelt, in particular, the American side, and developing countries that were very much a part of that, including from South America, and China was represented, was in the right direction. We've now got to carry that process forward. We frame it as a new Bretton Woods. And these four countries, leading countries, representing very diverse cultures, right? But bringing to the table ancient civilizations, great learning, knowledge, are key to this process. So, next slide, please. So, the American features, these are just the features that we point out as being critical on the U.S. side. Glass-Steagall is a restructuring of the banking system. That's the reintroduction of Glass-Steagall, which was the law in the United States up until until 1999 formally. National banking. We need a national bank. Whether it takes the form of the federalization of the Federal Reserve, whose holdings of paper now are ballooned back up to $4.25 trillion, as they're now buying financial paper in the repo market and beyond. We've got a crisis developing right now in these markets. We're going to have to put this financial system into a bankruptcy reorganization. That's what Glass-Steagall makes possible. But then mechanisms of national credit coming from the government. The government, we can create credit. We don't have to borrow from banks. You and I have to borrow. But in terms of a country, we as a country can issue credit against the future productivity of our nation. Earmarked investments into the real economy, as we see with China, which has lifted over 800 million people out of poverty in the roughly the last 2 decades, has built a national high-speed rail system. I believe it's now something approximately 40,000 kilometers. Has done so much to transform itself from a so-called third world country, or even fourth world, into a leading nation, gives you should give one a pause and insight in the fact that we once again can do what we've done before. What Lincoln did, what Franklin Roosevelt did to dig us out of the Depression, what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation did in the 1930s, 40s, can be done again. That's national banking, national credit, and then a science driver, and that's the space program. So, next slide. So, and on to the next. So, this is just, I'll just wrap with this if I'm still running okay in terms of time. I'm okay. Briefly, in terms of the history of our efforts in this direction, over this period around the world, hundreds and hundreds of conferences. Miss LaRouche, Helga Zepp LaRouche, the president of the Schiller Institute, first visited China back in the 1970s, and again was there in the 1990s, 94 I believe, and then again in 97, and saw the transformations occurring there. But also, where we came into this larger picture, and where we dovetail with the situation today, is the fall of the Berlin Wall. At that time, Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche proposed that the utilization of a triangle, a rough triangle between Bonn, Vienna, and Paris, which at that time was the area of the highest skilled workforce in the world, most advanced technologies, productive capacities, and so forth, be mobilized for not just high-speed rail as it indicates there, but economic development corridors reaching into Eastern Europe. That the question was the reconstruction, the rebuilding of the nations of Eastern Europe collaboratively, as we see with the Belt and Road Initiative today. Move on to the next slide. A schematic of a corridor, so roughly 100, 150 kilometers across, rail lines, energy, development of new cities, and so forth. That is not just transportation from A to B, but development of the regions across Eurasia as a totality. Move on to the next. So, and this was our Belt and Road, if you will, what we called then the New Silk Road across Eurasia and linking to Africa and beyond. So this was the concepts, proposals we took to Russia and addresses to the parliament in Russia and elsewhere. And our Russian friends then said, you need to talk to the Chinese. And we, so we did. Helga Zeppelin led the way. And so this concept of, which goes back to Leibniz, of linking Europe and China and developing the Eurasian areas of totality, the nations within it, has come forward now in a very profound way. And that should give us a hope, because this is what should uplift us the next 50 to 100 years. Where are we going to be? Where is mankind going to be 50 to 100 years from now? Most of us will not be here then, certainly not 100 years from now. But where will we be? What will we have done today that will place us where mankind, needs to be 100 years from now? And that's really defines the need for the science driver of fusion research, of the space program. As we all know, money is not spent in space, it's spent on Earth. The multiplier effect of crash science programs to multiply and replenish is enormous. So we could get into some figures on that, but to simply use one simple example, to bring mankind as a totality, nations around the world, up to at least current Western standards of living, would require at least a 600% increase in energy production in the world, 600%. So we're talking about enormous investments. The Belt and Road is part of that picture. Russia is part of that picture. The United States can come in much more collaboratively. And if we solve and make the breakthroughs required in terms of creating the financial architecture that will allow this, we can get this job done. Finally, let me just conclude that all of this should just underscore the need for global scientific collaboration and the free exchange of ideas. The Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States has hunted scientists since at least Albert Einstein, who Edgar Hoover personally attempted to get thrown out of the United States right up until his death. Think of Martin Luther King. The witch hunt today, so-called Russiagate, the witch hunt against Chinese scholars and students. This is not about freedom, democracy, or spies. This is about creating division and preventing exactly the kind of collaboration that's required. We have right now, we have a president of the United States, President Donald Trump, who says working with China and Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. We should let him do that. We should get this impeachment process off of everybody's back. We have more important things to do in the world. We have the cooperation between President Xi Jinping and President Trump. We have the phase 1 of the trade agreement, hopefully is being worked through. You know, there's all kinds of countervailing pressures out of the City of London and Wall Street against that. We have the cooperation and collaboration between the U.S. and Russia, for example, in Syria, a limited basis, but nonetheless important, and moving, hopefully, towards peace throughout the region, ending the endless wars. And I've already mentioned space, of course. And we have Modi. Modi was just here in Houston, right? Meeting with Trump here, addressing a huge event at the NRG Stadium. But we also had the Xi Jinping Modi meetings in China, the continuing dialogue. And of course, between Putin and Modi as well. So the point is that there's a growing collaboration, which if we can see through the fog of geopolitics and see clear of that and grasp the more fundamental reality, we'll be on the right path. So thank you.
Behind you.
Oh,
I get it.
Oh,
I get it.
sorry. Thought it was in the back there. Did that work? Oh, there we are.
Not quite enough room.
We okay? Well, I want to thank Mr. Lantz Bryan for those opening remarks, because as you can see, what the Schiller Institute represents is putting an end to geopolitics, to a system that says that nations cannot have a shared future of cooperation, of development. And the reason why we're here is that we really have to discuss what it takes to put an end to poverty and to bring about, as has been clearly stated, this beautiful new system of international relations. So there's a number of things, developments that have taken place, and I want to introduce our next speaker here, Deputy Consul General Prosvirkin, who will be representing Russia today. And I think, given the heightened political tensions that have been discussed, what you can really get an understanding of right now is that there's a different world that's going on out there, and we look forward to your remarks and giving us a clear picture as to the role of development and what Russia is participating in the cooperation that is very much underway right now. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Let me adjust the microphone first. Okay, so it's very difficult to hold this stage after excellent presentation made by Brian, but I'll try. It's my first experience of addressing such a respectable and intellectually capable audience.
Friendly.
Yeah, friendly. Yeah, that's very important as well. It's been my 3rd month here in the United States, so I'm just a new guy in town. So, as was mentioned correctly, I still fresh from the outside, so my perspective may be clear and not influenced by the local media or whatever influences you can get here in our interconnected society at the moment. So please cut me some slack and don't judge me too harshly. So hopefully you'll be interested to know what I'll say. So I'll divide my speech in 2 parts, since I knew that the other speaker would be the representative of China, the Consul General of China. And honestly speaking, I myself was connected to China because all my previous postings were to China, to Hong Kong and to Guangzhou. And I still can speak a bit of Chinese, though it's a very difficult language and it evaporates from your mind very quickly. But still. So I'll touch upon the New Silk Road, or as they say in Chinese, Idailu, a Belt Road initiative. And then we will, so what's Russia's take on that initiative? How do we see the future of this initiative? And then, of course, I'll touch upon the space exploration, as we're in Houston after all. It's impossible to skip this subject. So when talking about the road and belt, or as you call it, New Silk Road, it's important to say that Russia itself is pursuing its own integration format, so-called Eurasian Economic Union. It's similar to other economic unions that you can see all over the world. So it's aimed at introduction of common rules and regulations and creation of a single market. It's by no means a political or military pact, so the sole purpose is the economic development. This organization came into effect on the 1st of January 2015, So it's a bit later than the Silk Road Initiative. And now we have, at the moment, five member states: Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. So all of those are former Soviet Union republics. But still, the organization contains 184 million people as a population of the member countries. GDP evaluations differ, but surely within the top 10 of the world. If we talk about nominal GDP, if we talk about the purchase parity, it will be even much higher. So when both of the projects came to fore, skeptics, I must admit mainly from the Western media and Western academia circles, predicted that those two initiatives, integration initiatives, will be competitors, and they were on collision course, especially if we talk about Central Asia. As Brian showed the slide, the thickest corridor that's envisaged under the New Belt Initiative exactly comes through the Central Asia to Europe. So the critics say that that will inevitably put Russia and China on a collision course, as they will vie for the influence in that region. And I'm glad to say that the time has proved them wrong. So I would like to. So I would like to focus on that, how we made it possible to peacefully coexist and to complement each other. So from the start, both of those initiatives were envisaged as complementary, mutually reinforcing projects. So as I said, the Eurasian Economic Union was inaugurated in January 2015, and already in May 2015, so 4 months after, President Putin and Chairman Xi Jinping signed an agreement on interlinking those two initiatives. So it was stated officially that Russia, first of all, welcomes the new Silk Road. It doesn't consider it as a threat, as a competition. It's a friendly initiative, and if it's aimed at fostering economic development and therefore helping improve people's lives, then we welcome it. We're all for it. Myself personally spent 10 years in China, and I could myself witness the brilliant job the Chinese done in terms of lifting people out of poverty and changing lives, day-to-day lives. Just by the look of how people dress, what smartphones people use, what cars do they drive, what's their pastime. So it's a huge leap forward. It's just when I first came to China in 2003, and now the last time I was there in 2018, completely two different countries. As if not 15 years passed, but 50 years passed. So it's the change is that striking. So if the New Belt and Road Initiative will be able to share the success they achieved within the country with peoples of the other countries, I guess it will be a crime to say something bad about it and to counter it. So the important point is that peoples and cultures and countries should not be excluded from the benefit of integration processes. No one should feel unwelcome. So the central characteristics of both Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative is that they are open formats, not closed circles of selected few. So I will not call names. I'm a diplomat after all, and I'm right now acting in my official capacity. But there are certain new partnerships around Pacific area. That's, I mean, the initiatives of those partnerships, they change all the time. Now they're moving close to the Indian subcontinent, but still. So those initiatives resemble a private members club, And also, if we move closer to the west, to Europe, there is also huge integrational initiative there. That's a candidate country that would like to join that one should fulfill a long list of quite painful requirements to do so. It's completely wrong. So what we see in Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Summit or Economic Union is that they are open structures. You are free to join. Segregation is an enemy to beneficial cooperation. So all the integration formats must be open to any willing entity. Another essential point, which probably arises from the previous one, that it's all right for a country to be a part of several integration formats. It's wrong to make a person, a country, to choose a single one. So you're either with us or you're against us. It's the same with humans. So during our lives, we do not interact with just a single person or circle of persons. We have family, we have friends, we have colleagues. I don't know. We have fans of the same sporting team we cheer. So it's it's counterproductive. It's illogical to make a person to mingle and to cooperate with just a single group. You are free to choose which group you want to do business with. So animosity and mistrust start when one is forced to take sides, and it's counterproductive, as I mentioned, and that brute approach in the long term, it destroys any prospects of cooperation and resolution of conflict. So to bring you an example from the Russian perspective, that's what actually happened in 2013, late 2013, with European Union and Ukraine, when European Union persistently, without any regard to Russia's grievances, pressed Ukraine to choose sides, either to choose the so-called custom union with Russia, or either sign the economic association agreement with the EU. So, result of that approach we are witnessing today. So that topic is very close to Russians. Maybe it's a bit far away from Americans, but that's one we hold very dear. And as map showed, Eurasia is a huge continent, so it cannot be possibly covered by a single organizational umbrella. So various cooperation organization and various integration formats can and should exist there. So, for example, Belt and Road Initiative, ASEAN, Eurasian Economic Union, and let's not forget Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So it's also it's a very very important format. So, and those formats, they can complement each other. So it's I won't deliberate on what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization does, because it's developing rapidly at the moment. So we are looking about India joining us. So it will be a very interesting development with having India in China in Pakistan within one single organization. So integration formats must not compete but must cooperate. Competition brings let's say competition is good, of course, but healthy competition. Unnecessary competition will just squander resources that would otherwise could have been spent on improving people's lives. So any down-to-earth audience member may say that I'm painting a rosy picture that's actually interests of various countries that are not similar from cultural perspective, historical perspective. So the interests of those countries will inevitably clash. That's true if the parties involved blindly and stubbornly pursue their own agenda without regard and consideration of each other's interests. So just getting back to the Central Asian region. So the new Silk Route and the original one in the Middle Ages, or before Middle Ages, actually, passed through the Central Asia, and Central Asia had been a part of then Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union for 200 years. So Russia inevitably has vested interest in there. So how did Russia and China manage to not only not war over that region, but cooperate, mutually beneficial cooperate? So first, when dealing with a counterpart, you should exercise a restraint and willingness to uphold cordial relations. Language of ultimatums and sanctions will not work. Brash attitude of the Wild West doesn't work in the 21st century. So restraint, listen to your partner, and just think about what he or she has to say. Okay. So second, the relations should be based on a pragmatic footing. And it may come as a surprise to certain American politicians, readiness to compromise. Not everything in this world will go as you wish, and you must be ready to share. So in equal measure, benefits and responsibilities, and awards and expenses. So you should be realistic. I really like the Swedish band ABBA. If you know, do you know the Swedish band ABBA of the 70s? Yeah, they used to sing that the winner takes it all. But I guess in the modern world of the 21st century, winner does not take it all, because there'll practically be no winner. Maybe it will be in a short span of time, but in the long run, all the parties involved will be losers. So countries, if they want to cooperate, they should frankly declare or determine their strengths and weaknesses, and devise a proper model of cooperation that takes in consideration those strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, Central Asia, again, China is good at infrastructure, it's building infrastructure. Russia is good at energy sector. China can supply those countries' economies with cheap and reliable cars and trucks and trains. We can supply with excellent weapons for the armed forces. So it's complementarity. Complementarity is the key. Be cordial and considerate within the interhuman relations, and don't be a bull in a china shop. No pun intended. Develop trust. Develop trust. So that's all I wanted to say about the integration and cooperation formats. Let's move to space. And if I mentioned about trust, trust is also a crucial component when it comes to cooperation in the space sphere as well. Unfortunately, the events of the recent years show that there is a lack thereof, especially when it comes to Russian and American cooperation in that field. Since I talked about China and we have a representative of Chinese consulate here, let me first say a couple of words about Russian-China cooperation in space. It goes pretty well. And in particular instance, there is trust between our countries, and I guess that's what makes it possible for us to move forward. So in 2018, Roscosmos, it's the Russian Space Agency, and the Chinese National Space Administration signed an binding agreement on exploration of the moon and deep space. So Russia plans to launch a lunar probe, or moon probe as you call it, or lunar probe. It's called Luna. Luna in Russian, Luna is moon, so Luna 26. And we will use Chinese instruments on board of this probe. But in return, we are ready to help them with reaching again, maybe, South Pole in 2023. As far as I understand, it will be the second mission or the third mission. 23 for the South Pole on lunar South Pole. Do you have any mission on that scheduled for 2023? No, really? Okay. Maybe it's a different information, but still. So we established the joint data center on lunar project, so we can inter-exchange the data about the moon we have. So space exploration is, of course, time intensive, very capital intensive, and undertaking. It requires a lot of intellectual resources as well. So it's a long-term commitment. I consider it to be a miracle that the United States could put a man on the moon in a span of 8 years. So, if I'm not mistaken, JFK announced it in 1961 and 1969. You were there. So I'm not, honestly speaking, that optimistic about your 2024 aim and goal. It's very ironic to hear about all those great plans from a country that you in 5 years will put a man and a woman on the moon, but in 2019 you can't even fly to space and use Russian launch vehicles. So it's a bit of a stretch, I guess, but let's see how it goes. Space exploration is long-term commitment, and it requires strategic partners, those you can trust in the long run, once again. And that partnership should be stable. It should be multifaceted, and it should be clear-headed. It should be devoid of ambitions and emotions. So it should be reliable. In one word, it should be reliable. Consider it to be as a business. Of course, when you doing some very capital-intensive business, the last thing you need is for your partners to change minds and to change strategy or just quit from the partnership. So, what makes, at least from Russia's perspective, what makes it difficult for leading space powers to cooperate? First of all of them are afraid of the technology transfer. No offense, but there is as far as I understand, there is perception in the West that the Western technologies are far more superior than all the rest of the world, and that's why you are always afraid that someone will steal them. That's not the case. No. Not the case at all. When it comes, once again, when it comes to China and the history of cooperation, of Russian-Chinese cooperation in space, once again, Miss Wang, no offense, but China is very famous for, let's say, perfecting the technologies of other countries. But it didn't prevent Russia from working together with China. Don't be afraid that your technology that you have will be used by the other party. It's all right. Just be better, be one step ahead, improve your product. After all, it's not that easy to copy or replicate the rocket engine. And here I'm talking actually not about China, but about America. That's, though Hollywood portrays Russian space equipment as something with sharp edges covered in rust, and it usually requires a whack of a hammer to work properly. But still, United States has been buying our liquid fuel RD-180 engines for years and still can't replicate it, though your Atlas 3 and Atlas 5 rocket carriers totally depend on it. So, and then just a week ago, another 3 engines, those RD-180 engines, had been accepted by the customer, by the, if I'm not mistaken, Pratt & Whitney, United Launch Alliance. so they are the receiving party for those engines. So all this political turmoil doesn't stop Russia and America cooperating in space, but unfortunately on a very limited scope. Brian touched upon the contentious topic of NASA reusing seats on Soyuz rockets. It's a very difficult subject and divisive subject. So, as you know, Mr. Brandenstein a couple of weeks back officially sent a letter to Roscosmos requesting purchase of at least one, possibly two or more seats on Soyuz rockets in 2020 and 2021. So I will not go into reasons why NASA has to do it. So what I have to say that manned spacecraft project is a serious matter, and security must be first in the place. So neither Boeing nor SpaceX at the moment has been so far successful in this regard, and there is no alternative to reliable and trusted vehicle as Soyuz. What is troublesome actually is that, and in some way astonishing, is that NASA only got around to asking Russia for assistance only after a threat emerged that the United States segment of the ISS would have to go offline or be decrewed because of absence of American astronauts in there.
For the first time.
Yeah, for the first time in 21 years. So it's very disturbing that the American side had to wait for the very last moment. And right now the talks will focus not on the number of seats, let's say, so that NASA will be able to buy, but actually on chances of NASA's chances to carry out the manned missions on Soyuz MS spaceships. So now we're talking actually about providing the flight capability, and it's much more serious. So how did we, as Brian mentioned, so Russia and America were instrumental in bringing the ISS into space. So we had a very good relationship on that. So how did we end up there when we are now? So I can affirmatively say that NASA is being held hostage by the US politics. American agency could have reserved additional seats on the Soyuz spacecraft well in advance, but was unable to do so due to extraordinary pressure from United States politicians and government officials. It may be surprising.
Was that the current administration, sir, or was that previous administrations?
It's current one.
Okay.
No, it's previous. Nothing has really changed actually. So it's all started in 2016, and it keeps dragging on. So the thing is that it's not that simple. Not simple. It's an irony that NASA, even if Roscosmos agrees to sell those seats, NASA first has to go to Congress, American Congress, and to discuss this matter with the Congress, because there is so-called Iran, North Korea, and Syria Non-Proliferation Act, and Russia is under sanctions under this act. And there was an exclusion when it comes to NASA cooperation with Roscosmos, approved by the Congress, but it expires in 2020. So if we're talking about several seats, several missions that NASA will have to rely on Soyuz for, in this case, NASA will have to go to the Congress and to ask for the extension of that, for that exemption. And I guess it's a bit crazy when we talk about it. So American politicians are shooting the national space industry in the leg at the very crucial time. And I will not go into details about the ban on purchasing of those RD-180 engines. So if everything will proceed as it now proceeds, there will be, when the initial order for 29 engines will be fulfilled, there will be no purchases whatsoever. So let's say Russia agrees to grant the request of Mr. Brandenstein and agrees to allocate seats on Soyuz rockets. So what will it entail? First of all, we'll have to cut the size of our own crews in order to provide seats for the Americans. So why should we do so? The first question asked. It will negatively impact our own space agenda. We will have to make Russian crews more compact, and it will also affect Russia's plans for conducting scientific experiments, because we have, as you probably know, scientific experiments in space are planned well in advance. So this is kind of very rigid schedule you have to adhere to. So now we have to change it. So such behavior, unwillingness to cooperate, not only impacts Russia-US relations, but actually maybe you didn't give it a thought. It also impacts American allies. Brian mentioned Japanese space agency. So I just want to quote the Jim Brandenstein. So they made this decision to replace a Japanese astronaut with a US space flyer on the next Russian Soyuz launch to the ISS. The problem is that this one, Akihiko Hoshide, Japanese astronaut, he was going to fly on Soyuz MS-16 spacecraft, and if he flew, it would have allowed him to be on the station during the next year's Summer Olympics in Tokyo. So you can imagine the disappointment of the Japanese that they wouldn't have their own national in space at the time of the great event such an Olympics. So, and you have to take in consideration that Japan is an Eastern society, and they take utmost notice of the symbolism, and I guess they will not take it lightly. So maybe on the face of it they will keep on smiling and laughing, but still I guess it's a bit of a shame for them. And what makes it more grave, that as far as I understand, nobody even asked them what was their opinion on it. So NASA just made an irrational decision, and Japanese were left with to cope with that decision. So, but anyway, at this time, Roscosmos has allocated more money, additional money, to build 2 more Soyuz manned spaceships. Actually, the production capacities of the Energia Space Rocket Corporation allow for production of 4 spaceships a year. But it's possible to increase it to 5. So within this 2 years span, we have two extra more. And speaking about cooperation with other countries, there is a new interesting development that in recent interview, head of the Roscosmos said that Russia is considering offering Soyuz spacecraft for sale, let's say so. So if a certain country have the determination and money to pursue space mission, including jointly with Russia, Russia can help that particular country with just providing the training, so the software, the hardware, and the necessary training. So I guess it will be similar to what they use in the airline industry, so-called soft, wet or dry leasing. So we can lease a rocket, Soyuz rockets for, I don't know, which countries have a lot of money? Saudi Arabia, UAE, and they can fly by themselves. So there is still, just to conclude, there is still hope that Russia and America will get back on the previous track of cooperation in the space. There is some indication of that it actually may happen in the future. For example, NASA officials state that after American commercial crew vehicles start flying to the ISS, American astronauts still probably will continue to fly on Soyuz vehicles, and Russian cosmonauts will fly on those commercial vehicles. So it will be kind of in-kind exchange with no money involved. And the reason for that is it makes it convenient for crew rotations and just for the matter of security, that something goes wrong with one of the spacecraft, the other one can take its place. The only problem I see with it is the safety concern. Once again, as I said, Soyuz is trusted and reliable vehicle with a long history of service, and the latest fatality involving Russian spacecraft was in 1979, and unfortunately, when it comes to the American side, you were unfortunate to have it quite recently, in 2003. So we will see how long will it take for Russian, let's say so, regulatory bodies to approve and to allow Russian cosmonauts to fly on the privately designed and constructed space vehicles. So I guess it will take some time. It will take some time, but still there is, I guess, light at the end of the tunnel. Russia wishes USA every success with the lunar mission, and especially the Mars mission. That will be very daring, and hopefully we will be able to help you in some respect. From what I gather, talking to the Russian cosmonauts and specialists who are stationed here in NASA headquarters, because you may probably know there are about 25-30 Russian staff from Roscosmos based permanently here in outskirts of Houston in NASA headquarters. They are themselves a so-called liaison group, so they communicate with our central command in Zvezny, in the outskirts of Moscow. So what I gather from them, there is a good chance of our cooperation when it comes especially to the space medicine. It's especially true when we talk about Mars. So how do we protect people from exposure, long-term exposure to the solar radiation? How do we counter the so if I'm not mistaken, how long will the flight take to Mars? It's what about
3, 4, 6 months?
yeah, something like that.
With fusion power, it's less than a week.
Well, let's wait till we get fusion power.
All the more reason.
Yeah. So this the medicine. Hopefully, I guess it's the cooperation in the field of space medicine is not that high profile sphere of the cooperation. That's I guess it's kind of managed to go under the radar of the political circles of both countries. That's why there is not that much attention of politicians drawn to it, and that's why the scientists and the people who really make the exploration happen, I mean the astronauts and cosmonauts, can continue working on that. So that's my personal and Russian take of the topic of the today's conference. I hope I didn't shock you with some frank remarks what we have, but still it's what you said. It's the perspective from the other side.
Could you comment on the rapid warming of northern Russia and Siberia that will open up the Arctic Ocean and the north, and how you plan to develop that?
So recently I attended an event at Rice University. It was an event devoted to the new energy sources, and of course everyone was talking about global warming. And I said that probably Russia is one of the few countries that may actually benefit from it, because first of all, it will make majority of these of the territory of country hospitable and more or less welcoming for humans, because if you take a look at the map of Russia, it's huge. Okay, it's the biggest country in the world, but still, the most part of it is either taiga or tundra, where it's very difficult and unpleasant to live. The problem is, so first, one geopolitical, the other one is economical. First one, geopolitical, with the Northern Sea route opening up, with the pack ice retreating, it brings a whole lot of new challenges of who will control that sea route. I mean, the northern seas on top of Russia. So Russian officials stance that most of the Northern Ocean is the continuation of the Russian shelf. That's why we have exclusive rights to use it and to regulate the flow of traffic there. A number of countries disagree. So that's where the future conflict may arise from. And the second problem from the economic point of view, that all the infrastructure that we now have in that regions is dependent on permafrost. So all the roads, railroads, buildings were built taking in consideration the stability of permafrost. Permafrost is denser than the concrete. So if it thaws, we will have to rebuild almost entire infrastructure we have in the north of our country, because all the foundations of the buildings will go over, all the railroads will just be jagged. So that's so it's blessing in a curse in a single. So a single event brings benefits and drawbacks. So we'll have to see whether we'll be able to balance it.
Would you welcome a fixed exchange rate between international currencies? Or do you think that would contribute to economic stability?
No, I don't think so. If I'm not mistaken, I'm economist myself. I majored in economy, but it was quite a time ago and I forgot the details, specifics. The gold standard didn't work well after all, and if I'm not mistaken, the countries just ended up devaluing their currencies against the gold standard just to get the footing, get the benefit of, to gain the level of competition from their weak currencies. So I don't really think that the fixed currency exchange rate will provide for, will be effective to better use the productive forces all the various countries, productive forces and production capabilities all the various countries have. So I guess it's utopian. So that's my point of view. Yeah, thanks. But we definitely welcome more currencies to be included, first of all, in the IMF reserves, and we welcome the usage of national currency when countries trade with each other. So Russia was forced to abandon the dollar when it comes to, it was, for example, funny that when we trade with China, we have to use a dollar. So why don't we use yuan and ruble? And that's what we have been doing for the last 2 or 3 years.
So sanctions is a disaster.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And your question, I think, will be a subject of discussion that Mr. Lantz can actually fill out a little bit more later, because I think it's very important. I just want to, first of all, I think it is appropriate right now, given the remarks by Deputy Consul General, to also give remembrance and also to remember the contributions that were made in cooperation in space, and remembering the life of Alexei Leonov, who passed away on this year, October 11th, 2019. Because when we think about international cooperation and cooperation in space between the United States and Russia, the United States and Soviet Union, I mean, one of the most inspiring periods in history was the cooperation in 1975 of the Apollo-Soyuz missions. And we should take real courage and take inspiration from what developed at that time as, first of all, as people know, Soviet Russian cosmonaut Alexei Leonov was a prolific writer, also an artist, very inspiring artist, and he was the first to take the first extravehicular EVA walk in space, first human being to do so. So Russia has made great contributions to the advancements of a number of firsts for mankind in space, and this was one of them. He and Valery Kuboskov, so Valery were the two Russians that were joining the American astronauts on the Apollo-Soyuz mission. Today I've had the opportunity to engage in the dialogue with Mr. Stafford, Tom Stafford, who was on that mission, who is still alive. Also, you had Dick Slayton, Donald Slayton, and Vance Braun at that time. So it's very worth thinking about where we can find our areas of cooperation historically that can be very appropriate for today of holding hands. Now, again, I want to, before I introduce our next speaker, Madam Wang, Madam Xiao Wang, I want to just make a point to add to both of the presentations that have been stated so far on the question of international cooperation and a shared future of humanity, because I think the remarks that were made by Deputy Consul General here were very appropriate, and they might have shocked a lot of people because he told a lot of truth, and it's it's very important that he did so. But to put it in perspective again, one thing that people should know, that this week as we speak, there was a very important meeting that took place in the international, in Shanghai, in China, in International Import-Export Conference or Summit there, where I just want to state these remarks that brings this together. Just a quick quote from the President of China, Xi Jinping, who has been very instrumental in defining this very identity and ideal of a shared community of principle, which the Schiller Institute very much respects and looks up to. And so in his remarks, as he's speaking about China's lifting millions of people, 800 million people out of poverty, as he's talking about the development that they have undergone, he goes on to say that of the problems confronting the world economy, none can be resolved by a single country alone. We must all put the common good of humanity first, rather than place one's own interest above the, rather than place one's own interest above the common interest of all. I have faith in the bright prospects of China's economic development. China's development viewed through the lens of history is an integral part of the lofty cause of human progress. China will reach out its arm and offer countries in the world more opportunities of market, investment, and growth. Together, we can achieve development for all. The Chinese civilization has always valued peace under heaven and harmony among nations. Let us all work in the spirit and contribute to an open global economy and a community with a shared future for mankind. And that has been the basis of the type of cooperation and collaboration that you've seen, as you alluded to, as you develop between Russia and China. And that's the type of cooperation that we are calling to be brought together by all of the four leading powers of the world, as Brian brought out at the beginning, Russia, China, India, and the United States, based on a new system of relations. And so with that, the way that you do that is you define it by the idea that there are no boundaries in the universe and space we live in. There are no borders. When you're talking about mankind expressing his extraterrestrial imperative in going out to explore in space. And so we're very happy with the developments that China has undergone in terms of their rapid pace of developments in space, including being the first country to have a lander on the far side of the moon. And as we say, China did this not for its own benefit, but for the benefit of all of humanity. And we look forward to more of those developments and those developments together, as you see many of our countries right now working toward space developments of going to the South Pole of the moon. And we'll hear more about this. And I think that when we find out that all of these countries are there on the South Pole of the moon, we should realize that maybe we should be working together while we're up there. So again, Madam Xiao, thank you very much, please.
Thank you, Kesha. And actually, special thanks for you to mention the expo and the quotation, so it will no need for me to repeat it again. So, and thank you very much also for Professor Brian for the invitation, and also thank you for your great speech, and also from the Deputy Consul General Prosvirkin. Yeah, it's always hard to pronounce your name. Actually, my honor to be here today and to share my views and cooperation with you. And just now, I think both of them have given very great speeches, and Brian shared his vision on the common development of the regions and the world, and especially thanks to you for your introduction, for your clear and objective introduction of the Belt and Road Initiative. And also, I was touched by the philosophy mentioned by the Consul General here from Russia about the philosophy about cooperation. And today, I would also like to share with you about my view on the cooperation. And I know actually this is my 4th month to be here in Houston, just 1 month older than you. Yeah, you know, it's I know this year is the anniversary, the 50 years anniversary of the historical lunar landing. So it's remarkable for me to come in this year, to come to this famous space city, you know, to begin my mission as a science and technology counselor here in Chinese Consulate General in Houston. And actually during the short 3 months here, the 3 months experience in Houston, I have participated in several events linked to the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing. And also I know the Schiller Institute has also made very good seminars around this theme. In fact, not only in the US, but in China and in other places of the world, people are also celebrate this special year. So actually, we are very touched by the pioneering work made by the American astronauts, which is a mission, actually a mission of human beings. So I believe, you know, I know in China there's a lot of people review the classic sentence, that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. And that sentence inspired lots of people, no matter in the space exploration or in other fields for the pursuit of the science and technology. And also, I think the facts show that the exploration of space and science at large is the common pursuit and common mission of the human being. And as you may know, the Chinese people's pursuit and longing for space is quite a long-standing one. Even right now, we do not have so much cooperation with American as our Russian friends does in the space technology. But we have the tradition to longing for the space. And the mystical stories that have been handed down for thousands of years in China tells us the ancient Chinese exploration of space. For example, the image of goddess of the moon in China, you maybe right now you know the name Chang'e with the detector, in Chinese history. So, and also since the Qing dynasty, which is 2,000 years ago, each dynasty of China will set up a specific agency to observe the astrology. And there were also many well-known figures that have made great contribution to the exploration of space. Just for example, there was Zhang Heng in Han Dynasty, which is 2,000 years ago, and he invented the seismoscope and initiated, actually he's discovered the old theory of cosmology, which is quite similar to the modern one. And there was Wang in Ming Dynasty, which is 500 years ago, who is well recognized as the first man, actually the first attempt by human being to use rockets for flying. So that's a long story. He wants to fly to the space and to use a rocket. Of course, the result is he died from that. But it's very special. The special thing is it is the very first attempt by the human being. And right now it's also recognized by the U.S. and by the whole world. There's a crater actually on the moon named after him. It is because of the continuing pursuit of space exploration that in the 1950s, when the Chinese people were still very poor and unable to have enough food and warm clothes, and China began to take the journey of space science exploration. And in the year 1960s, China launched her first rocket, the Rover rocket. And in 1970s, the first man-made satellite, Dongfang-Hong No. 1, was successfully launched. That makes China became the 5th country in the world to launch satellites. Since then, China's space exploration never stopped. There's kind of support and cooperation from many countries, from partner countries, as well as there's exclusion and isolation of few others. And it is with the efforts of generation after generation from Chinese scientists engaged in this mission that the stories come to a well-known one. That is 16 years ago, Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei completed the first manned space flight in China by the Shenzhou 5th spacecraft. And then the newest story maybe will be this January, the Chang'e, the Force detector, realized the first soft landing of humans on the far side of moon, which is, I know is encourage the people in the world, not only in China, for the space exploration. Actually, it's for the exploration of science. And it is also because of the hard work of generations after generations that I will have the chance to stand here to talk with you about the space cooperation. And actually, I think space, I understand the purpose of this symposium is just take space as an example. The real thing we want to talk about is the science and technology and the cooperation. So the science, as just, I think two of them have mentioned a lot about the nature of science and technology, is the commonwealth of human being, cannot be owned by anyone else alone. So taking space as example, the scientific exploration of space not only enrich our spiritual life, but also enrich our material ones. As we all know, technologies in weather forecasting, computer science, and medical science benefit a lot from the exploration of the space. And actually, our daily life is also benefit quite a lot from the space exploration, which seems far from us, but it's very close. It is now gradually recognized by many countries in the world that science and technology is vital for the development and prosperity of a nation and the world. In China, actually, it's, almost 40 years ago, our leaders to propose that the science and technology is the most important productivities. And so we believe that science and technology have promoted the development of human society with irresistible force. In particular, right now, a new round of revolution of science and technology as well as industrial revolution is underway. And science and technology is becoming the most active factors in productivity and is having a profound impact on the evolution of human civilization. And also, just now we also mentioned the common challenges. There's a lot of problems, common challenges we need to solve. And we believe science and technology will be one of the very important way to find a solution. So like many countries, the Chinese government always attached great importance to the science, technology, and innovation. So since the founding of the People's Republic of China 70 years ago, it has put forward the strategy of marching to science over decades ago, and the current strategy will be building an innovation-oriented country to achieve the development of innovation-driven development. And based on her own efforts, it has established a relatively complete modern science and technology system. Just here to share with you a few numbers for you to get an idea of that. Last year, China's total social R&D expenditure accounts for 2.18% of GDP, which is not the highest one in the world, I know, but is quite a big progress for the China through these years. And the total R&D personnel exceed 4 million, and high-tech enterprises reached 180,000. So the number of the invention, patent application, and authorization ranks first in the world, which is very encouraging. And also we are keeping doing much work to improve the environment and to protect the intellectual property rights. And the total number of international scientific paper and the number of citations ranks second in the world after the US. It is important that China's scientific and technological progress has not only played a positive role in its own development and its people's well-being of their daily life, but also benefit the people of the world. That is our mission, just as Kesha just quote the speeches from President Xi Jinping. That is the word from the president, and that is also the common understanding of the science and technology communities in China, among others. At the same time, the Chinese government also attached great importance to international cooperation and exchanges in the field of science and technology and innovation. And we are willing to promote the global flowing of the science and technology resources with an open attitude. So I do not need to repeat it again, but I have to mention that President Xi Jinping have repeatedly stressed that science and technology are worldwide and temporary, and that science and technology must have a global perspective. So right now, China has established cooperation ties in the field of science and technology between governments, to governments with 160 countries. I know there's friends from Russia and Indonesia here today, so that is both one of our most important partners in science and technology. And we have signed over 114 intergovernmental cooperation agreements in science and technology. And China is also active in the international science organizations for the science and technology. We are right now the members of more than 200 international scientific technological organizations and mechanisms. And also we actively participated in international major science and technology programs, just as for example, at the ITA, the reactor. And recently, maybe you mentioned just this week there's Expo in Shanghai, and actually there is lots of important international conference held in this month. Today is November. In the autumn, in the autumn, most of China is in a very cool and comfortable weather, and but the international cooperation in the field of science and technology is still like summer. There is you may know from the internet, from the media, that since October there's more than 10 major international conferences held in China in different cities. Just for example, like the first World Science and Technology and Development Forum, and the 6th World Internet Conference. And there's International Electrotechnical Commission Conference, and they will hold the 2nd World Top Scientists Forum. Just to name a few which have big influences. And that shows that when we are very open to the people in the world, we welcome all of the people, all of the intelligent people, all of the wisdom to come to China to discuss about the problem happened in both countries in the world, and we would like to find a solution together. Actually, in China right now, if you just search in the internet or you just talk to the common people, you will know the topics, what is the hot topics. So right now, the topics of enabling the world with science and technology and have open cooperation is one of the hottest one. And I will not mention Xi Jinping's speech. But there's one thing that the president repeated again and again, is the door of China will be opened wider and wider. This year is very special because this is also not only the 35th anniversary of Schiller Institute, and also is the 40th anniversary of our opening up and the reform and opening up of China. It is, this is last year. It is the common responsibility of the international community to make human beings benefit from science and technology. And this sentence is repeated again and again from the president as well. So that shows that China has always believed that the science and technology should serve and benefit the common progress of all mankind, of the human being. And China is willing to continue to carry out exchanges and cooperation with countries around the world on space exploration and on all the fields in science and technology. And we also just mentioned we would like to welcome cooperation in an all-round way and in a very open attitude. And we would like to make more contribution to human exploration of the mysteries of the universe and peaceful use of the outer space. For example, the Chang'e, this January, the satellite, the detector that successfully landed on the far side of the moon. China attached great importance to international cooperation and exchanges before the mission was begun, just at the very beginning. And we hope to provide international counterparts and scientists with opportunities to conduct lunar exploration, which we know people has great interest in that. And so we collected scientific laws carried from interested countries in the world before the launch of the detector. And China is also, right now, of course, we have our own scientific equipment and laws on the detector as well. And we are willing to share with the countries of the scientific data obtained by the scientific laws, which is independently developed by China. So this shows our attitudes towards the cooperation. We would like to share, and we would like to take concerted efforts for the goods of both sides of the whole human being. And in the past 40 years, over 40 years of reform and opening up, China is opening its arms with a more open mind and initiative, and willing to cooperate with the most intelligent people in the world. So, standing in the new century, actually, China has also proposed a Chinese solution for the global governance and the common development, which is very well introduced by Professor Lantz. That is the Belt and Road Initiative. And by the Belt and Road Initiative, we would like to contribute to build a community of human destiny and achieve a win-win sharing and a win-win development, win-win cooperation among the partners on the planet. So we are very happy that the initiative has been widely supported by the international community. So right now, Professor Lantz has also mentioned that I'm so glad that you update the data very immediately, because right now we have signed 197 cooperation agreements with 137 countries and 30 international organizations, which is one more than a month ago. Yeah. So, just I mentioned, this year is a very remarkable year. It's quite a lot of anniversary. It's the anniversary of the founding of People's Republic of China, and also it's the landing on the moon and the Schiller Institute. And it's also the 40th anniversary of the signing of China-US Intergovernmental Science and Technology Cooperation Agreements. 40 years ago, shortly after of course, it's the 40th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between our two countries. And I'm so glad that the science and technology agreements is among the earliest one that was signed. It was signed at the very visit of the then Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping 40 years ago when he visited the United States. And under the framework of the agreements, our two countries, China and America, have carried out a large number of fruitful and mutually beneficial cooperation in the field of science and technology, including people-to-people exchange, academic exchanges, and joint research and development, and platform building up, just name a few. And in the past 40 years, the international situation and the relations between the two countries have undergone tremendous changes. But there's one fact that has not changed. That is the interest of China and the United States, actually, and the other parts of the world are highly integrated and interacted more than ever before. So it is especially true in the areas of science and technology and innovation. So, especially in the face of infectious diseases, climate change, and uncertainties brought about the emerging technology, just like the AI. And there's many global challenges need us to tackle together. We cannot do that alone. And at the same time, the innovation cooperation between industries in the region, in the world, is bringing obvious benefits for the prosperity of both countries. And according to the statistics of the National Science Foundation of the U.S., China and the U.S. are each other's largest international partners for co-authoring the scientific articles. So, we need each other. That is needs not only from the government, but from the scientists, from the researchers. They need each other. Actually, over the past 3 months, even it's very short, I met a lot of American university professors, experts, and scholars, and also entrepreneurs. I'm glad that many of them, they have very objective and clear understanding of international cooperation and exchanges in the field of science and technology. And I also read the open letters by the profound universities and scientific organizations here in the U.S. They mention a lot about how the cooperation should be. And also I read the articles by Professor Lantz, and they are I think they are all full of rational thinking. So I'm so happy to read that. I'm so happy that you are here. So all of this show that the strengthening of the cooperation between the two countries is in line with public opinions, and it conforms to the common interest and benefits of both sides. But the fact, is not so positive. So recently there's obstacles in many places regarding the exchanges and cooperation, and regarding the visa things between our two countries regarding science and technology. So this has brought frustration to the like-minded scientists in the pursuit of scientific exploration, and also making confusion to the entrepreneurs from both countries who were full of confidence for win-win cooperation. They do not know how to continue, what to do in the coming periods. And also it makes my work here to be face full of difficulties. It's far more harder. It's much harder than my predecessors. So I'm also thinking about how shall I do as a Counselor for Science and Technology. But even so, I still full of confidence for the coming years in my work. I think the first reason is the nature of science and technology and innovation. Just now we have mentioned a lot. So it's not property of anyone itself, of any country itself, but it's wealth of the human being. So we believe that is the right way to do for the science technology and for the cooperation. And the second reason why I'm confident is in the philosophy and wisdom of the Chinese people. Just share with you that in China we have very simple philosophy, that is work hard and do your own business well. So for China, which used to be very poor, I mentioned, so at that time its own business will be trying to make her people have enough food and warm clothes. And right now we have our Chinese dream, which is achieve a national revival and satisfying our people's longing for a better life. So that is the driving force for all of us, no matter from the government or from the universities or from the industry. That is the driving force for them for their daily life, for their work. And we are fully aware that this dream cannot be given by others. We cannot just just lying there and wait it for the dream to come true. And we cannot scream up for that. We need to do things by ourselves. We need to work hard. So that is also what people do in the space exploration in China over the past decades. So just share a few more with you that the Communist Party of China just held its fourth plenary session of the 19th Central Committee in Beijing. And this meeting is focusing on a number of issues concerning the development of the country. And so the most important thing is we are deciding to adhere to improve and adhere to the socialist system with Chinese characteristics, and advancing the modernization of the national governance system and governance capacity. So that is, we do the reform and opening up over 40 years ago. And right now, the reforms in different aspects, in different fields, are still going on, keep going on. So we will find the problem, find what the problem is, and we will try to fix it. So this meeting I mentioned gave the nation a clear direction on which way to go, and how we could do it. So the final reason, the third reason for me to be confident is about the ages, about the times. I understand the today's world, the globalization is a must thing. So it's the historical trend of the world. And in particular, in face of the problem and challenges faced by the world, we cannot go it alone. We cannot do it alone. We need cooperation. We must work together. So the cooperation will be one of the things that I'm going to do in the coming years in Houston. And here I can help to mention that among the cooperation, I think the most important thing for us right now is to enhance the people-to-people exchange. So just now from the remarks of both speakers, I can know that both of them know China very well. So, but it is a fact that not all the American people know China as well as the Chinese people know about American. You know, there's lots of channels for the Chinese people to know about American, to know about the society, to know about the people, and to know what we are doing, what we are thinking. There's films, and for China, the U.S. is a place with most concerns. But I don't think there is so many Americans to know such well for the Chinese. So first of all, no matter for the cooperation, for the how we can get along with each other, we need to know each other first, and it is necessary for all fields. And for my mission, I will try to bridging the exchanges and bridging the cooperation in the field of science and technology in the coming years during my mission here. So finally, I would like to thank you for the Schiller Institute to host such a good symposium for people. That is one step for people to know each other. So thank you.